Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, I sit down with News Director Mechelle Hankerson for a recap of April's health news. Virginia Beach's City Council rejected collective bargaining for its firefighters.
It's a disappointment for us, it's a disappointment for the community, and it's a disappointment for all the workers across the city of Virginia Beach.
NPR's Marker series continues with a story about the first Black Virginian to win an Olympic gold medal in boxing. And VCIJ explores how Norfolk won a federal grant to develop a new Interstate 264 interchange downtown, hoping to reconnect Black communities long displaced from their neighborhoods. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. The federal government is giving Virginia $156 million to boost access to solar power. We get the details from WHRO's Catherine Hafner.
The federal program is called Solar for All. It's part of the Biden administration's efforts to tackle climate change. The Virginia Department of Energy hopes to use the money to make it easier for homeowners and home builders to install solar panels and battery storage. Spokesperson Tara Kesterson says over the long term, electricity from solar is cheaper. The new program will cut upfront costs so lower-income households can benefit.
This opens that market up to people who may not have been able to afford this type of energy before, and also makes their overall energy payments much more affordable than they were before.
She says that aligns with Governor Glenn Youngkin's Virginia Energy Plan that emphasizes energy affordability. Virginia hopes to start making money available by early next year. The state expects half of all households to qualify. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
North Carolina will receive $156 million to kickstart a new solar energy community engagement program. WFAE's Zachary Turner reports on the program. It is called Energize NC.
A new statewide program aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by increasing access to residential solar in disadvantaged communities. Stuart Gardner, Senior Program Director for the nonprofit advocacy group Generation 180, said Energize NC would increase access to solar for communities that would benefit from it the most.
Right now, not everyone's able to adopt solar because of high upfront costs. If you rent or if you live in an apartment building, those are all barriers.
Residential energy consumption in North Carolina is among the highest in the nation, accounting for more than a quarter of the state's energy use in 2022.
The Navy is offering remote counseling for mental health. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says Hampton Roads is the first Navy region in the country to roll out that new service.
The idea came out of the pandemic, allowing sailors and their families to attend counseling remotely. Fleet and Family Services has always offered mental health services outside the chain of command. Donetta Fox, program coordinator, says remote counseling also adds another layer of privacy.
The counseling that we provide here is not documented in their service record or in their medical record, and we don't notify commands that someone is coming in for counseling. It's completely confidential.
Sailors are most often asking for help to manage the stress of deployment or adjusting to military life. Remote counseling also allows couples to participate in counseling even when they're in different parts of the country. The Northeast region has 10 counselors dedicated to remote counseling. As the largest Navy region, it was the first to offer the service full-time. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
It's time for the April Health Roundup. I spoke to Mechelle Hankerson about this month's health news, including the region's first freestanding hospice house and North Carolina's battle to get new weight loss drugs covered for state employees. At the beginning of the month, Virginia marked its first Black Maternal Health Week. What was that all about?
Black Maternal Health Week is actually a national week, and this year state lawmakers passed legislation to make it official in Virginia, and the Virginia Department of Health made an announcement about it too. The week is about recognizing that Black women consistently are several times more likely to die in childbirth than their white counterparts, and that is true in Virginia as well. So that week was about recognizing some of the data, some of the challenges, and some of the work that the state has been doing to try to address some of those numbers. In Virginia, they estimate for the past several years that Black women are about 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women.
So there were some new things that happened this month, specifically about organizations and some buildings. Let's start with Virginia Wesleyan's Center for Career Development and Neurodiversity. That's a big name. What's going to happen there?
Yeah, so this is going to be a center that serves on-campus students as well as people who seek programs that Virginia Wesleyan has for non-degree seeking adults. And this is specifically geared toward people who have some sort of disability. They talked specifically about people with autism, but they also made very clear in interviews with WHRO that this is for anybody who has like a learning disability, any kind of disability. So for students who are on campus, kind of doing the whole traditional 4-year student thing, this might mean that the center helps them identify some accommodations. So maybe they get some extra time to do an assignment. Maybe they get some extra time to do a test. And then the programming for their workforce development, they are going to work with people in the community on skills that people with certain disabilities might have some trouble developing. So interview skills, resume writing, just being prepared to do some of that stuff in the workforce that you don't always get training on, some of those interpersonal things. So that's what the center is there for.
And more recently, the Desorts Hospice House of Hampton Roads opened. It's a huge milestone for the region, right?
That is. And this is the region's first freestanding hospice house. It opened in Virginia Beach. And what that means is that there is now a hospice house with 24-hour on-site medical care, in addition to other features that a hospice house typically provides. So at the Desorts house, you have the nurses, you have folks who can administer medication, and they are on site. And then you also have things like rooms where families or other caretakers can stay overnight to see their loved ones, to spend time with their loved ones. And Governor Glenn Youngkin was actually at the grand opening in Virginia Beach, and he was just really pleased at how the project came together, and this is what he said.
I see the Virginia Beach community step together in a way that is reflective of Virginia Beach, yes, Mr. Mayor. A city council that did the right thing. A group of truly generous individuals who stepped forward and said, is there anything more important than respecting this journey?
It's been kind of an issue whether insurance companies were going to cover these new weight loss drugs. I know you indicated in North Carolina, state officials have been trying to figure out how to do that for the state employees. Have they sorted that out yet?
As of right now, no. North Carolina's insurance for state employees was trying to figure out a way to cover those new popular weight loss drugs like Wegovy, but it was getting way too pricey. North Carolina's trying to find a way to cover it. A lot of states are in this situation, and a lot of states have just decided not to cover these kinds of drugs for employees because they're just too expensive.
And that's the April Health Roundup. Thanks, Mechelle.
Thank you.
Environmental and recreational fishing groups pushed Virginia to ban industrial menhaden fishing in the Chesapeake Bay. WHRO's Catherine Hafner reports that effort failed.
The Virginia Marine Resources Commission voted down the latest petition after hours of passionate public comments on both sides. Regulators said they don't have enough scientific evidence to support restricting the menhaden harvest. As Commissioner Heather Lusk noted, state lawmakers recently postponed a study that would have helped.
It is incredibly frustrating that we do not have the information, regional information that we need. It's also frustrating that it doesn't appear that there's much that this commission can do.
The controversy hinges on whether menhaden are suffering in the Chesapeake Bay specifically. Harvester Omega Protein says federal data shows it's not. Critics say that data reflects the whole East Coast, which could hide more localized issues. The proposed study to find out would cost the state around $3 million. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Virginia Beach's City Council rejected collective bargaining for city employees, specifically firefighters, on a split vote Tuesday night. WHRO's Ryan Murphy covered the story.
5 council members were in favor of granting city employees the right to collectively bargain contracts. 5 were against it. Amelia Ross Hammond abstained, saying she's still learning what bargaining would mean for the city. Max Ganano, a city firefighter and the president of the local union, was visibly frustrated after the vote.
This is what these elected officials are there to do. They're there to make decisions. They are not there to punt. It's a disappointment for us, it's a disappointment for the community, and it's a disappointment for all the workers across the city of Virginia Beach.
After the meeting, city employees gathered outside the council chambers to talk about bringing another collective bargaining request to city leaders. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Early voting for June primaries begins today, Friday, May 3rd. WHRO's Mechelle Hankerson tells us what's on the ballot.
The summer primaries are for congressional and local candidates. In primaries, voters pick from options from the same party. The winners go on to challenge the other party in November's general election. Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives Districts 1 and 2 are holding primaries. The first district includes the Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck. The second district includes Virginia Beach and parts of surrounding cities and counties. There's also a Republican primary to pick a candidate to run against U.S. Senator Tim Kaine in November. Early voting ends Saturday, June 15th. Mechelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
To find your early voting location, check your registration and other information. You can visit elections.virginia.gov. Botetourt County native Norvell Lee earned an Olympic gold medal in boxing in the early 1950s. He was the first Black Virginian to do so. A historical marker and new book offer a much broader perspective on his impact. Radio IQ's Jeff Bossert has more.
The highway marker on Route 220 bearing Norvell Lee's name is within a couple miles of where he grew up and went to church. Historian Ken Conklin first came across Lee's name in a newspaper article in 2016, the year the Olympic Games were played in Rio.
Article from the Fincastle Herald, it was a headline story, said Botetourt native won Olympic gold. And somehow it got my attention. There was a companion article with it that said that, but that's not what all Norvell Lee did during his life.
While Lee's accomplishments as a boxer may alone warrant that state marker, its inscription also mentions his military career and when he boarded a train in 1948 during a time of Jim Crow segregation.
He was on a train going from Covington to Clifton Forge, and he got arrested for sitting in the white section of a really, really rural train. There were only about 4 people on the train.
Lee was asked to immediately move to the train's black section, but refused. He was told by the Allegheny County Sheriff to move or get off. He did exit the train, but went straight to the ticket office to cancel his ticket, replacing it with one to Washington, D.C. He reboarded, got in the same seat, and was arrested. Lee ultimately won that case on appeal in the Virginia Supreme Court, as the court ruled segregation laws did not apply to interstate travelers. By that time, Lee had humbly earned his share of accomplishments already, including time in the Army Air Forces as a member of the Tuskegee Airmen. He had also been to his first Olympic Games in London and was a graduate of Howard University. But he was also a quiet, unassuming man who had a stutter that cut his pilot training short. Conklin says his earliest searches on Lee's name came from a boxing blog, highlights from a career that got started when he was stationed in the South Pacific. It picked up when he was a student at Howard University and later in the amateur Golden Gloves competition, as heard in this 1951 newsreel.
The fightingest feud in boxing, Chicago versus New York in the Golden Gloves, rolls to a rip-roaring climax in Madison Square Garden. The News Welfare Association spectacle winds up in a tie for intercity honors, 8 bouts apiece. But there's no deadlock here as New York's heavyweight Norvell Lee wins a Socceroo victory over Toxie Hall of Chicago. This tale of two cities ended happily.
It's at the 1952 Olympic Games in Helsinki that he earned his gold medal. Lee never turned pro as a boxer, but later took up a career in education, including as a counselor with the Department of Justice, living in the Washington, D.C. area in his later years. He died from pancreatic cancer in 1992. 2 of Lee's granddaughters credit Conklin for helping them now realize who they lost when they were very young, saying they have fond memories of family vacations, but not the deep history. Tiffany Eiler calls it an aha moment.
And even the people that he played pinochle with didn't even know, like it was just a nonchalant thing, like, hey, is that a gold medal? Well, yeah, okay. You know, he was really subtle. He wasn't braggadocious about his accomplishments.
Eiler's cousin, Danielle Anderson, says she felt a sense of belonging when she was in Botetourt County for the marker unveiling.
I have a better I won't say understanding, but a better feeling about how he came up and how important he and the family were to that place. And so seeing the recognition now down the line means so much more.
It's only recently that Anderson learned that she and her grandfather were both involved in Toastmasters, the nonprofit educational group that works to develop public speaking skills. For his 2020 book, Norville, An American Hero, Ken Conklin says he can find similar traits throughout Lee's family history.
He grew up in a family where education was first. His mother emphasized education for his two brothers and his sister. When Norville went to Howard University, he became a teacher or an assistant at the National Training School for Boys. The kids would tease him about his stammer. They would tease him about his stammer, and he would just give it back to them.
The Lee Historical Marker was unveiled in 2022 when honoring a man many now refer to as Botetourt County's most famous son. I'm Jeff Bosser.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
Virginia's Planned Parenthood expects a rush of new patients now that Florida's 6-week abortion ban came into effect this week. WHRO's Steve Walsh covered that story.
Virginia is now the only southern state that has not imposed additional restrictions on abortion after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Planned Parenthood, according to the state's executive officer Paulette McElwain, is trying to gauge how many patients will now head north.
In the midst of this crisis, we are dedicated to meeting the unique needs of our patients and supporting our highly skilled providers and healthcare teams.
In 2022, if you take 100 Planned Parenthood clients here, only 3 came from out of state. By April, that number of abortions went up to 20. And this week, 30 out of that 100 are from out-of-state patients. Virginia's Planned Parenthood, anticipating the influx, has added new staff at its clinics in Richmond, Hampton, and Virginia Beach. McElwain stressed same-day appointments remain available. Last year, Florida was only second to California in the number of abortions performed. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Virginia is home to several cities with high eviction rates. To assist families that lack legal representation, a group has launched a website offering help. WHRO's Ryan Murphy has the details.
Phil Story is a housing attorney with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. He says more than 100,000 families face eviction every year in Virginia. Far too many for legal aid attorneys to help or even for the attorney-staffed eviction hotline the center ran from 2019 until last year. Using lessons learned from that hotline, the group has started the Eviction Defense Center, publishing resources online for families facing eviction without a lawyer.
Hopefully, folks who shouldn't be getting evicted or folks who have a good defense can actually raise that defense and avoid eviction in court.
FightMyEviction.org, which is also available in Spanish, includes step-by-step explanations of the eviction process and scripts for court appearances. Data from Princeton University's Eviction Lab shows several Hampton Roads cities, along with Richmond, continue to have some of the highest eviction rates in the nation. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
A recent study by Forbes Advisor reveals that Virginia is among the top 5 states in the U.S. with the highest incidence of road rage. We get more from Barry Graham.
Forbes says Virginia came in 4th nationwide for most confrontational drivers in the country. More than half of Virginia drivers report that another driver has exited their vehicle to confront them, and 2/3 say they've been the recipient of a rude gesture. Nearly 90% say they've been cussed out. The top reason for road rage are heavy traffic, being stressed out, and running late. We're most likely to be on the receiving end of road rage on the highway or in a parking lot. Arizona topped the list for rude drivers. The most polite are in Delaware. Barry Graham, WHRO News.
Norfolk won a federal grant to develop a new I-264 interchange downtown to reconnect Black communities long displaced from their neighborhoods. VCIJ senior editor Lou Hansen sat with reporter Elizabeth McGowan to discuss how the city will address the issue.
Hi, this is Lou Hansen, co-founder and senior editor of the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO. Elizabeth, welcome. Both Norfolk and Richmond have received federal reconnect highway grants. What are they and what do they do?
Highways were this engineering marvel, the interstate highway system, so we thought. But the repercussions were these highways went through minority, usually Black communities. So the idea is to look at how do we knit these communities back together. It's likely does not mean taking down a highway, but it means figuring out how to have a cohesive neighborhood once again that has been just, torn apart by giant asphalt strip, basically.
One of the things that you turned up in your reporting is that there were 1 million people displaced by the U.S. Highway Administration. It's had a particularly big impact on Norfolk and Richmond. What have you found there?
Well, what I found was that I-264 basically was built beginning in the 60s and through the early 90s. And that whole spaghetti bowl tangle just isolated the St. Paul's community, which was a historically Black community. It was intentional. I mean, this was intentional segregation. And so that people didn't have to look over at that neighborhood when they zipped along through Norfolk.
How much did Norfolk receive in this federal grant, and what would it address?
Norfolk received $1.6 million. The idea was to get rid of as many barriers as possible, although they didn't spell out specifics. They're looking at things like, City Hall Avenue. They're looking at the Market Street off-ramp, Tidewater Drive on-ramps, and then these cloverleaf interchanges near Brambleton Avenue.
You sat down and you interviewed several community members and activists in Norfolk. And some of the Black community are skeptical about the latest project. Why?
When I talked to Zenobia Wilson, who had lived in Tidewater Gardens for quite a while, she has moved elsewhere, as everybody else had to do. And they say, oh, yes, they're inviting us back. Well, her life has moved on. She has children. They're going to different schools. She's fitting into this new neighborhood. She likely is not going to move back. When the city tells them this time it will be different, they just immediately have a bad reaction to that, thinking, no, it's going to be the same. You're making it sound like it's different, but it isn't.
What's next for the Reconnecting Communities grant in Norfolk?
It's just strange to me that the grant and what came out of it is so vague. Besides talking about those basic intersections in the spaghetti bowl, what they're going to do.
Elizabeth, thanks for your reporting.
All right, thank you.
To read the whole story, go to vcij.org or whro.org. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Catherine Hafner, Steve Walsh, Ryan Murphy, Mechelle Hankerson, and Barry Graham. WFAE's Zachary Turner, Jeff Bossert with Radio IQ, and VCIJ's Lou Hansen and Elizabeth McGowan. Also Connor Worley, who produced today's broadcast. A reminder that you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.